Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining me today. I'm Marshall Mawson, and I'm a senior product manager at Udemy. Udemy is an online learning marketplace that connects over 40 million students across the globe to instructors and their courses. And today I'm going to talk to you about how to get your first PM job by understanding the role and the skills you'll need in order to get it. And I'd like to add a disclaimer that the views expressed here are completely my own and have nothing to do with Udemy or any of my past employers. So I'll start by talking about my career journey and how I eventually became a PM. And I'll then talk about what PMs really do in order to get an understanding of the role and learn how to talk about it. And then lastly, I'll discuss what I think the most important skills for a PM to have are. So before I get to my career path, I'd like to mention that getting your first PM job can be a difficult and windy path. Most people I know who are product managers got the job somewhat through luck or by transferring jobs internally at their company or by going to a small startup. There isn't usually a clear career path, and it can take a while of building up the right experience to get there. My first PM job didn't come until 9 years after I started my career. And I've spoken to a lot of MBAs and college students who are trying to get into the product management field. And I always caution them not to expect to get the job or the industry they want right away. It can be really hard to change job industries and functions, and especially changing them both at once is very difficult. You'll likely have to have connections from one job to the next, like I did. So, for my career path, after studying math and economics for undergrad, I started my career as a financial analyst at a car company, Ford. And after being there for a few years, I decided to get an MBA to broaden my knowledge and open up new opportunities. So while I was taking classes there, I got an unpaid internship at Dollar Shave Club in order to gain some experience at a tech startup. And this actually proved really valuable to me as a way to get my foot in the door to tech at a hyper growth tech startup. And it was a great conversation topic in interviews in the future. Um, but I ended up getting lucky enough to get a formal summer internship at eBay on their auto parts business team. And truthfully, the real reason that I got this job was because it was in their auto parts business and I had worked at a car company. So at least I had the domain knowledge there. Um, After school, I returned to eBay full time as a category manager, and I was able to get a lot of breadth working with different product teams across the company. I eventually transitioned into this new group called Product Strategy, and I was able to take on projects where I gained a lot of PM like experience. Um, However, when I was interviewing for product manager jobs outside of eBay, it was really hard to convince the hiring managers that I had enough relevant experience. There were already plenty of people with direct product management experience that they could choose from. So why would they choose me? Once again, trying to leverage domain and industry knowledge, I was able to get my first real product manager job at a small startup called Top Hatter. And Top Hatter is a discovery shopping app and is a two-sided e-commerce marketplace. A former boss of mine worked there and she recommended me, and they were willing to give me a shot because of how similar the business was to eBay. I was hesitant at first of going to a company that most people hadn't heard of, but the experience was extremely valuable for me, and it was definitely worth it in the end. Being at a small, fast paced company, I was able to make a big impact and learn a lot really quickly. But ultimately, I wanted to move to an industry where I'm more passionate about. Now that I finally had this direct product management experience and I had the job title on my LinkedIn and my resume, it made it a lot easier for me to pursue the next gig. An opportunity came up at Udemy as a PM for anti fraud, and I was able to get it. Now, anti fraud wasn't exactly my dream role, but it's a great company in an industry that I want to be in. Plus, Udemy is also a two-sided marketplace. So there are a lot of similarities to my previous marketplace experience at eBay and at Top Hatter, even though the merchandise is very different, being a digital good. So, after a year of the anti-fraud role, a new opportunity came up for me in pricing and monetization, and that's where I'm at now. and it's something that I'm really interested in. So the main takeaway here is that take each experience as a stepping stone and recognize that it's a long road and it's hard to get exactly what you want in terms of job role and function early on. But you can gain relevant experience in any role, and you never know what will come of it in the future. And just know that for most people, their road to becoming a product manager was long and windy. So I've spoken to a lot of MBAs and people in non-product roles who are aspiring product managers. And during those conversations, I often find that it's helpful to them when I explain what product managers actually do at a high level. Um, every product manager's job will be different, but the overarching responsibilities will be similar. So I'll explain what my experience has been like as a B2C product manager at smaller companies. Your job is ultimately to set the strategy and prioritize the roadmap for an area of the site or application that you're responsible for. You'll end up being an intermediary with many different teams across the company. And most importantly, you're enabling and helping to lead a very precious and expensive resource, which is a software engineering team. Now, you don't manage them directly. They report to an engineering manager who you work really closely with. But you still need the right soft skills in order to make sure that they trust you and they understand the why of what they're supposed to be building. And the job responsibilities can be broken down into three main buckets: strategy, planning, and execution. And I'll get into what each of them look like in the next few slides. So, especially when you're further along in your career and you have enough domain knowledge in your product area, you should be setting a longer term strategy in the area you're responsible for. Think 6 months, 1 year, and 2 to 3 years out. Even at a smaller company, it can be very important to be able to share a deck showing your high level plans for the year and where you think you should be headed in the future. This will help you get buy-in and feedback from executives, other stakeholders, partner teams, and even your own engineering team. If you can showcase a vision that people believe in, and if you have financial opportunities for the company identified, this will help you get the resources and support you need. And your strategy will lead into more tactical planning in the future. So this strategy should be developed from a variety of sources. And these can include competitive or industry research. They can include talking to internal stakeholders like customer support, who might have a lot more context on opportunities and problems within the company. It can also be helpful to look at historical context from your company. Past successes and failures can help inform your strategy, but you should be willing to try variations of what's been done in the past. Don't let past failures be an excuse not to try something again in a different way. And of course, you should be understanding your customers as much as possible and making decisions based on customer needs. If there's customer research that's been done in the past, make sure to read that and understand. And also, very importantly, you should identify areas of opportunity through data. If you're able to show big dollar value opportunity in your area, this will go a really long way towards getting your initiatives prioritized across the company. And it'll make it easier to stack rank your initiatives against other initiatives at the company. So, your product strategy should influence your work over the long term, but you'll obviously need more tactical product plans in place. And the clearer and more well-informed that your product plans are, the more success you'll have with your product development process. So, depending on how much control and influence you have over your product area, you'll often be setting the objectives and key results, or OKRs, for your team. So you should understand the important metrics in your area and have quantifiable and impactful key results to motivate your team. People want to be able to see the impact that they're making on the business. Your OKR should also then lead you to planning out your roadmap timeline for the half or the quarter. And you'll work with your engineering team on estimates of the level of effort of the projects and be able to put that in a timeline that you can share with your partner teams and other stakeholders so that they understand when things will be coming and they're able to do their work that's required. You'll also often have smaller projects that are going on and need planning and support from a product manager. And you might handle these through one pagers or just cards in Jira or Asana or whatever software that you use for tracking ideas and engineering resources. But most importantly, though, are the big strategic products that you're responsible for. So, as you can see on the right of the slide, I've listed many of the steps and the different teams that you might need to work with in order to have a successful product launch. And this list isn't necessarily exhaustive, um, but it gives a good idea of the kind of things that you'll have to do and think about and plan for as you're planning a new product launch. And it doesn't need to be in this order, but this is kind of generally how it would often work. So ideally, you start with a problem or an opportunity. And this, with that, should also be some research and some data to back it up. You'll eventually create a one pager where you'll get your problem statement and ideas down on paper. And this is where you'll start to get feedback from others. You could then work with your user experience designer to brainstorm what the customer experience should ideally look like. And they'll help by creating wireframes or mockups. And they might even do some usability testing with customers to get an idea of how these early wireframes appeal to customers. Eventually, as the PM, you'll create a much more detailed product requirements document, or PRD. And this might be used by engineering, design, quality assurance, customer support, product marketing, or other roles in order for everyone to understand the detailed requirements of the product and have it all in one place as a reference. For the user-facing front-end experience, engineers will work to code off of high-fidelity designs that are created by the UX designer, and these might live in a separate design tool like Figma. Um, Another thing to note that's really important is that you might be dependent on other engineering teams for your product to launch. You might need the mobile team, or you might need a separate payments engineering team to do work for your product. So they'll need to be well aware of the requirements and have your work scheduled in their sprint planning. New mobile app features especially might have a really long lead time until enough users have updated their app version and have the new features available. So you'll also want to work with product marketing if your company has that function in order to make sure that the product launches successfully and customers understand it. And you'll really need to work with customer support so that they're ready when the product launches and they can answer any questions that might arise from customers. And I'd say that, if at all possible, you should try to collect data before investing heavily in engineering. You should really have a phased approach to your product launch, building in some capacity for being able to iterate as you learn more through data and through customer feedback. So if it's possible in the beginning to launch an A/B test with a minimum viable product, or MVP, where you're able to gauge interest in your product or features with minimal engineering effort, then you should do so. This will help to either validate or disprove the assumptions that you might have had going in. You don't want to make your team invest weeks or months on something without knowing whether it'll even be successful, especially if you can learn something up front. So ultimately, your job will come down to execution. You need to be able to work with the right teams to ship the products and actually make an impact to the business. And your day-to-day will consist of a variety of tasks. Many of them will come down to ensuring that that planning work that was mentioned previously actually results in a successful product launch, making sure that all of the different teams are aligned and doing their work in the right sequence for the product to launch. Ideally, if you have a technical program manager or a project manager, they can help you with making sure the alignment is all there. Tactically, you'll also work with your engineering team to break down larger projects into smaller tasks. And these are usually represented in Jira cards or Asana or whatever software you're using. You'll often have a 2-week sprint process where you'll need to make sure that the highest priority tasks are actually getting completed at the right time. And you'll need to constantly be working with and communicating with your stakeholders to manage their expectations and make sure that they understand the timelines. Also, along the way, you might be monitoring existing A/B tests that your team has going on or other data for your area. You should always understand the health of your data. And lastly, there's always unplanned stuff that comes up. People will think of you as the domain expert for your area, and you'll be the person that they turn to first. You should be able to effectively triage these requests that are coming in and make sure not to just pass everything off to engineering. You don't want to distract your engineers with things that aren't even a big issue. There's always trade-offs to be made between what's urgent right now and what can wait. And you don't want to burn people out. So you should be able to make these assessments when new things arise out of nowhere. So I'll close with mentioning some of what I think are the most important skills for a product manager. There aren't inherent skills to being a product manager. Some can be learned and others just come with experience, but the right mix of skills and knowledge can set you up for success. And you can develop these skills in any position. You don't have to be a product manager. If you're in operations, you can learn a lot of valuable skills for being a PM. One of the most important skills is being able to figure out what data you need to look at, and then being able to tell a concise and cohesive story with that data. One of the most valuable things I learned along the way was SQL. And if you don't know what SQL is, it's a way of taking a database and querying the data in order to make it more concise and readable. So at eBay, it just simply took too long to have to wait for data from the analytics team. So I was able to teach myself SQL, and I've gotten much better at it through experience, practice, and looking at other people's queries. Good SQL knowledge can really be a differentiator for you as you're looking at PM jobs. If you're able to understand and explain data in a way that others can't, that is super valuable. And it's a desirable skill that not every PM has. And if you don't know where to start with learning SQL, maybe check out a SQL class on Udemy. I'd also like to say that writing SQL queries isn't necessarily mandatory, but being able to look for and understand the right data is. You'll probably be in a world where there's just too much data, and you need to be able to distill it down into something concise. Another thing is that you should be naturally curious. You should want to understand why things work the way they do and what can be improved. You should want to explore problems and learn from customers. You should want to look at your competitors. You should want to dig into the data and really try to learn from it. I'd also recommend learning from the code. You don't need to know how to code, but it can actually be very helpful to explore your code base and have some kind of passing literacy for the code. The more you understand about how things work, the better you'll be at your job. And lastly, you need to have empathy. So, you should have empathy and learn how to work with the engineers, how to work with your customers, how to work with customer support, marketing, etc., any role. A lot of the job involves soft skills. And the better your relationships are that you have with your stakeholders, with your partners, with your engineers, with executives at the company, ultimately, the more influence you'll be able to drive at your company. That's all I have to share today. I want to thank you very much for joining, and please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email. My contact information is here on this slide. And lastly, I just wanted to give credit for the presentation template, icons, and images from these sites here.